That I think was the part I was most excited about on this project.
So I'm Danielle Forte. I'm from Pop Culture
Mhm.
Planet. I'm so excited to talk to you about The Knife today. Can you go into
Yeah,
how this film used a unique period home as the primary location?
it's like interesting when I was, I guess, pitching for this job, doing the interviews initially. I had like a couple of days beforehand where I was just like mulling over the script and like putting together references of what I wanted it to be. And I'd happened to have just shot at this location fairly recent before, so I knew it was available. I knew what we were kind of working with time-wise in the script, and to me, like the aesthetics of it, but then just the practicality of the space, like really felt super manageable. And so like I did this whole multi-page deck of like references of like here's how I see the film looking, and I had a photo of that house in the deck as just an option. It's like this feels good. And the night before the meeting, I kind of had this like second guessing myself, and so I pulled the photo and I put a generic photo of like just a similar but totally different like just house that I'd found that kind of had the same vibe. And got into the meeting with Namdi, and we were like, chatting about everything and like, getting along really well. And it was very obvious that like we kind of had a similar idea of where the aesthetic was going and what it needed to be. And he stops and he's like, "Hey, can I show you some locations? Like we've been location scouting the last couple of days and we found this place and I want to see how you feel about it." And so he does a screen share thing and he starts showing me the photos of the exact same house that I'd put in there. And I literally just started laughing in the meeting at that point. It's like, all right, cool, we're good. I know this place. I love it. I think we can do good work with it. And so from there, I think we met out there a couple of times at the location with our cinematographer Alejandro as well. And very quickly we're like, all right, this place, it's a good basis to start with, but it's just bare bones. There's nothing in there. A lot of stuff that had to get removed, but we knew it had the feel of an older home that someone would get in hopes that they could let build on it and clean it up and remodel it kind of back to some of its glory for their family, which plays in really well with the premise for the script.
Yeah, and so speaking of that, how did you design each individual room in the house to reveal details about Chris and his family as we move with them throughout the story?
That I think was the part I was most excited about on this project. It's always tough doing more or less like one house, one location, whatever film, because you spend a lot of time in a single space and it can get either boring very fast or it gets very confusing. Um, and so when I saw this one, since I also already kind of knew the location a little bit, like my brain started turning on ways um, we could do that. And so to the best of what we could with how things unfold throughout the script, because we do bounce back and forth through some similar rooms, we kind of started establishing a color palette that was tied slightly to the characters and slightly what's going on with the script that we move through. We kind of have very subtle differences in the color tones of each of the rooms to help kind of support Chris's character and like the turmoil and all the extra effort he's putting into his life to try to make something for his family, but then also highlight like the stability and the lovingness between him and his children and his wife. Um, and so we kind of started out working with color palette and figuring out how we were going to repaint rooms and treat those spaces to help support that sort of color arc as we moved through. And then from there, just started building on top of that with the set dressing. A lot of the rooms, uh, the house is supposed to be still partially in construction, and we kind of came up with this fake timeline of, they moved in. What are the most important spaces that you need when you're in a house and you don't have a lot of the resources that you normally have? And so it was like getting the bedrooms and at least one of the bathrooms going first. Um, there's a whole point early on about the older daughter Kendra's room not being finished yet, and so that became a spot that we were like, okay, we can make a room in the back that's like just sheer chaos, and its tools are piled up, and the walls are like old wallpaper from like the 1950s has been peeling away, and especially in this one, uh, the most important aspects of the movie go down in the kitchen, and we really wanted it to be a space that was still like deep in construction. Um, so it was a finished kitchen, and we had to like resurface everything we could, put in new cabinet faces and a new floor over the existing floor and make fake countertops to look like it was still in flux. And we just kind of tried to like play with those in a ways so as the investigation goes down and they move through different rooms, you kind of get these moments of, you know, this is a little bit more normal family life, and then this is still in chaos, and use that to kind of like hype the tension, I guess, between the family as they're trying to keep their secrets and get through the night, and then the investigators doing what the investigators are doing, and just the tension that brings.
Yeah, okay. I personally have never been through a renovation, so did you have to like research home renovations to make this set?
A little bit, yeah. I've just, you know, being an art department, you end up doing a lot of things over the years, and so you kind of start to get an idea of like, all right, here's how construction goes down, and what stuff happens. But in the particular case of this one too, I did look up a lot of visual references to like what does an older home look like this when you start pulling things back, um, and you know what kind of damage happens along the way that then as a new owner you're going to come in and you're going to want to repair. And we spent a lot of time too, like looking into, you know, he's doing this on a budget. He's working a construction job. There was a lot of discussion about, you know, maybe he's not doesn't have the money necessarily to go out and like buy all new things. He can do a lot of the work himself. And, you know, maybe they're doing a renovation on a house in another side of town and there's some like extra cabinets that were available somewhere. And so he like brought those home and like changed his plan to start using things um, that were accessible to him that he can help save money and you know make a better home for his family. And so it was a lot of kind of like pulling those references together and a little bit of like, well, if I was in this position, what would I do? And trying to do that in a visual way that works for camera and not necessarily just like what would real construction be. So, but we ended up with a lot of sawdust on the floor and things like that that we had to keep sweeping into perfect piles for like 5 weeks while we were shooting. So it always looked like it was in the middle of work.
You don't even think about that when you're watching a movie. And so, like, going into that, you kind of touched on it. To a general person watching this and not being really in film and stuff, can you go into, like you were saying, like, oh, if I were in his position, I would do this? Like, can you go into how set design really like aids to the overall storytelling and how important it is to a story?
I don't know if all production designers, I mean, I would assume all production designers, just when you read a script you're seeing in your brain in a very specific way about like what the backgrounds would look like and you know where the positions of the camera are. Um, and from there, like, you know, we really start thinking about how those textures and elements in the background sort of like lend to the story. Generally, I prefer to keep them pretty low key. You don't generally want it like screaming at people, like, you know, hitting them over the head of like, here's what the story's supposed to be based on this. Um, but I really like the nuance of details of feeling like a place is really lived in and it's not, you know, just a big static stage that's there that, you know, everything's specifically placed. It should feel like a little bit chaos and a little bit real. So, especially in the case of this one with the family, it's like, you know, he's busy, his wife's busy, everybody's running around. There's going to be lots of little bits of things of daily life just laying around that it, hopefully, you know, in the back of your brain, your subconscious is like seeing them as you're watching a film, and that starts filling in some gaps and like kind of letting you know like how this family's life is, and it's just like a very subtle way of supporting the story.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's just books off in corners or receipts and some pocket change that got put down on a table because you were too busy to do something with it, or like the sawdust in the kitchen, things like that. Just trying to put as many layers of life in there so it looks like they've been there for time, and you know the daily activities that they go through have all sort of like affected the place around them, and it's not something they just got dropped into a couple days before. So.
Yeah, true. And I want my last question to be a fun question. So, how did you get into production design?
Ooh, that's a big one. um, I kind of started in cinematography a little bit. My background when I was younger was very much into just making things. I would build anything I could sort of just want or wrap my head around in ways, and I was usually terrible and it ended up awful in some way or another. But as I got older, kind of like fell into engineering and like just sort of learning how to make things on a more industrial level. But then also fell into art at the same time and started doing cinematography and photography for myself. And I moved to Los Angeles actually as a photographer. I'd been doing a lot of fashion work for a while, and I was really captivated by very stylized imagery, whether it was coming from film or like late 90s fashion photography was like just this amazing era of really interesting work that was also heavily influenced by cinema. And so it was like this convergence of things that I didn't quite understand. I just knew I really liked these beautiful stylized um, images. And so I moved to LA and was like doing fashion shoots and taking meetings and starting to kind of like build that career. But I also was like staying with friends that had just graduated from like UCLA and they're doing like their film stuff. And since I knew about film a little bit and I knew about imagery, I just kind of started like picking up jobs, like finding locations and kind of doing anything that was needed on set. And it usually involved making something since I kind of knew how to work with my hands, build something, and had kind of an eye for how lighting would affect it since I was so used to shooting myself and I knew lighting and color and lenses and how that stuff behaved. And I think I did that for about 2 or 3 years before I finally admitted that I'm actually working in film and that this is like a real job that I do. And after a couple of years, finally, I was like, oh, all right, I guess I'm a production designer, and just started doing it full time. And
Wow.
starting with teeny tiny jobs, bouncing around indie films and stuff, and just kind of stumbled into a thing that I actually like really, really love.